Starting a business can seem like a daunting task, unless you have a partner like Shopify. They have the tools you need to start and grow your business. From designing a website to marketing to selling and beyond, Shopify can help with everything you need. There's a reason millions of companies like Mattel, Heinz, and Allbirds continue to trust and use them. With Shopify on your side, turn your big business idea into... Sign up for your $1 per month trial at shopify.com/special offer.
This episode is brought to you by Netflix. 3 couples, 4 vacations, a lot to unpack. Watch The 4 Seasons, a new series starring comedy favorites Tina Fey, Steve Carell, Will Forte, Coleman Domingo, and more in a hilarious and heartfelt love letter to long-term relationships. Based on the original Alan Alda film. Watch The 4 Seasons, May 1st, only on Netflix.
Welcome back, True Crime Army. I am your host, Margot, and this is Military Murder, a show where I focus on crimes committed by military members and veterans. But don't worry, you don't have to know anything about the military to listen. You just have to be a true crime enthusiast, and if that's you, welcome home. First, I want to start off by giving a shout out to all my new patrons and premium subscribers who took the leap last week and joined the bonus episode club. I see you and I appreciate you. With that, let's get into today's story. I have to apologize in advance because today I will be bringing you a devastating murder case from the mid-1990s. Today's case involves a child, and it involves discussions of rape and brief mention of pornography. With that in mind, please listen with care. Join me today as I take you to the small town of Lemoore, California, circa 1995. This is the case of Maria Pecino. Now, let's dig in.
Discretion is advised.
On Monday, March 27, 1995, 8-year-old Maria Pecino and her 6-year-old sister Lucerito had just arrived home from school. They lived in the small town of Lemoore, California. Arcelia, who was Maria and Lucerito's mom, started making sandwiches for the 2 young girls who had just arrived home from school. And, when kids get home from school, they seem to be ravished. As mom was getting ready to fix the snack, she suddenly realized that they were out of tuna. Maria told her mom that she would go to the store and that her mom could stay with her little brother and sister. Mom agreed since the Food Lion was only 2 blocks away. So a little before 3:15 p.m., Maria left their home in the San Villa apartments with $3 in her pocket. And you have to remember, this is the 1990s when people were accustomed to walking to school and walking to the store on their own. In fact, I remember when I was 7 years old, I used to walk to school on my own. It was a good 8 to 10 blocks away. And now that I have children, I think, oh my gosh, that's crazy. Anyway, Arcelia watched the clock while Maria was gone. It wasn't like she stopped paying attention. No, she watched the clock, and when Maria had been gone for 10 minutes, Arcelia started looking out the window. Then 11 minutes passed, 12 minutes passed, and finally, when Maria had been gone for 15 minutes, Arcelia packed up the other kids and walked to the Food Lion to look for her daughter. Arcelia would later tell police, "A really strange feeling came over me right after she left. For some reason, I started feeling desperate and scared. I felt something bad was happening to her. I grabbed my 2 kids and went out to look for her, but we couldn't find her." As Arcelia walked the neighborhood and the Food Lion, she looked for Maria everywhere, but Maria was nowhere to be found. This was very unlike Maria to just disappear or get distracted. By 4:10 p.m., Arcelia was desperate, so she called the police to report Maria missing. It had been less than an hour that she had seen Maria, but she knew something was wrong. Authorities began searching for Maria, and they started with the Food King. And they also looked in the surrounding stores in that plaza. They also went into neighborhoods and even searched near the school to see if maybe Maria got distracted with friends or at a nearby park. While asking around at the Food King, investigators found a cashier who remembered seeing the little girl. Actually, they were able to pull up the recent transactions, and they found one transaction where someone purchased 1 can of tuna at 3:18 p.m. That was the last time authorities found anyone who had seen Maria. Police issued an APB, which is an all-points bulletin for Maria, and they also alerted law enforcement throughout California to be on the lookout for the young girl. Within days, they coordinated efforts with the FBI, the Polly Klaas Foundation for Missing Persons, and the Adam Walsh Center for Missing Children. Now, I do want to stop here and say that sources differ as far as how quickly the police response was for little missing Maria. Of course, Maria's family felt that maybe the police weren't doing as much as quickly as possible, whereas authorities felt that they had acted as quickly as they could. What I know for sure is that Maria's disappearance was highly publicized, as I found various historic newspapers that covered her case. As the search continued, authorities tried to determine where Maria could possibly be. And of course, as with any case, they started by looking at Maria's immediate family. They wanted to determine whether there were any types of conflicts. Was her mom being truthful with regards to what happened to Maria? Had Maria possibly run off after an argument with her mother? Is that why she wanted to go to the grocery store by herself? Well, they quickly determined that Maria was a happy child, and she had a pretty good relationship with her mom and her sister and her baby brother. But they can't be that sure. So Arcelia took a lie detector test and passed with flying colors. So police lean in and they start asking about Maria's father. What's the deal with him? His name is George Pecino, and he immediately comes into focus as the main suspect. As they were looking for Maria, Police Commander Bill Hudson told the Lemoore Advocate, "We don't know for sure, but there's a chance that the father might have the child. That's one possibility, but we're certainly not closing the door on any other possibility." And the thing was that just as they were trying to find the dad, he was MIA. So just a little background, George was Maria and Lucerito's father, but he and Arcelia had a volatile relationship, and he had left the family home when Maria was just 5 and her sister was 3. And the separation was hard on Maria. She was a daddy's girl. But Arcelia was done being abused. And in fact, she had a permanent restraining order out on Jorge. I know I said George before, but his name is actually Jorge. But that still didn't stop him from showing up at the house unannounced. In fact, just 3 weeks before Maria went missing, Jorge showed up at the house and threatened Arcelia that he was going to take Maria to Mexico with him. This really piqued the investigators' interest, and they wanted to find him now more than ever. As they looked into Jorge's background, well, he had quite the rap sheet. He was a drug dealer and had various addresses and cars listed in his name. When investigators tracked Jorge down at an address in Sparks, Nevada, Maria wasn't there. Instead, police found a large quantity of heroin ready for distribution, like literally just sitting out. As police saw this, they grew even more concerned, thinking that Maria may have ended up as collateral damage for her father's illegal business. Arcelia was desperate to locate Jorge because she also believed, just like authorities, that he had taken his daughter, so she tracked him down to his then-girlfriend's house. And Arcelia pled with the woman to please disclose Jorge's location. At first, the woman didn't want to give any information, but finally she saw that Arcelia was desperate, and she told her, "Listen, Arcelia, Jorge is in jail." So authorities were like, okay, if Jorge's in jail, it should be pretty easy to locate him. So they look into the local jail system and they search Jorge Pecino, but they can't find any inmate with that name at the location where his girlfriend said he was. So they were trying to figure out, was the girlfriend lying for him? Was she helping to hide Maria? Like, what's going on here? So they weren't taking any chances. They notified the California Border Patrol as well as the FBI liaison in Mexico. Meanwhile, back at home in Lemoore, community members came together to get the word out about missing little Maria, and they handed out missing persons flyers with her description. The flyer listed Maria on the missing persons poster as a Latina 4' 5" little girl. She weighed 65 pounds, she was 8 years old, brown eyes, long black hair with short bangs in the front. In the missing persons poster, Maria's picture was missing some of her front teeth. At this point, the last time anyone remembered seeing Maria was in the area of Bush Street and 19th Avenue, which was near the Food King, the store where she had purchased the tuna. She was wearing a long-sleeve pink shirt, green pants with black polka dots, and black shoes. The following day, which was Thursday, authorities and volunteers began searching neighborhoods and fields around the area that Maria went missing. They had nothing to go on at that point, and just hours before the search began, they were able to rule Jorge Pecino out as a suspect. So you might be wondering, where the heck was Maria's father? Well, it turned out that his girlfriend wasn't lying. He was in fact in jail. However, he was in jail under an assumed name. Jorge was being held in a Nevada facility on narcotics charges and had been there since March 14th, which was a good 2 weeks before Maria went missing. So logically, Jorge was ruled out, but they weren't convinced that he didn't have someone on the outside helping him to hide his daughter. So they had to keep looking at the possibility that Jorge was somehow still involved. And this theory was bolstered when Arcelia received 2 phone calls from an anonymous woman. The woman claimed to have Maria and said she planned to sneak her across the Mexican border, handing her off to Jorge's parents in central Mexico. Authorities immediately made contact with Jorge's brother, thinking that he was the one who abducted Maria. But the man had an alibi and was nowhere near Lemoore, California at the time of the disappearance. Authorities then paid a visit to Jorge's parents, Maria's paternal grandparents in Mexico, and they seemed genuinely shocked to learn that Maria was even missing. The anonymous call, it turned out, was just a cruel hoax, and now authorities were back at square one. Authorities then turned their attention back inside of Maria's home, and they look at her mother's boyfriend, Alfredo. Alfredo was the father of Arcelia's youngest child, and according to those close to the family, Alfredo didn't seem to care too much for Maria or her little sister. He seemed to resent the fact that Arcelia always put her daughters before him. When questioned, Alfredo told authorities that he wasn't involved and even agreed to take a polygraph, which he also passed with flying colors. Law enforcement, though, they were not so sure, so they impounded his vehicle and processed it for evidence. Nothing was found, and he was ultimately cleared when he provided a rock-solid alibi. Alfredo was 45 minutes away testifying in a Fresno courtroom as a witness in a criminal case. So that means that at the time Maria went missing, Alfredo was not around. Police now feared that since everyone in Maria's immediate circle of friends and family were cleared, there was only one conclusion. Maria must have been abducted by a stranger. Today's episode is sponsored by Acorns, and April is Financial Literacy Month, an entire month dedicated to taking control of your money. Because honestly, no one really taught me how to manage money growing up. I didn't learn about investing until I was well into adulthood. But what I love about Acorns is that it makes it easy to start saving and investing for your future in just 5 minutes. I know, April is an entire month, but you don't need an entire month to learn. You don't need to be an expert. Acorns recommends a diversified portfolio that matches you and your goals. You can start with just your spare change, and you don't need a lot of time. Setup takes just 5 minutes because I know that your time is precious. And if financial wellness has ever felt out of reach, Acorns makes it simple, giving your money a chance to grow without the overwhelm. Personally, using Acorns gave me the confidence to stop putting it off and just start. And that peace of mind is completely worth it. Sign up now and join over 14 million all-time customers who've already saved and invested over $25 billion with a B dollars with Acorns. Head to acorns.com/militarymama or download the Acorns app to get started today. Paid non-client endorsement. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Tier 1 compensation provided. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisors, LLC, an SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/militarymama.
Ladies, you'll end up shopping for your guy's deodorant, right? So try Degree's Original Cool Rush. You see, last year, Degree changed the formula, and men were mad. One guy even started a petition. So Degree admitted they messed up and brought the Original Cool Rush scent back. It's clean, crisp, and actually smells like someone you want to cuddle. And it's in Walmart, Target, and other stores now for under $4. So toss one in your cart and find out why it's the best-selling men's antiperspirant for the last decade. Degree Cool Rush is back, and it smells like victory.
As everyone in the community became more and more aware that Maria was probably abducted by a stranger, they put together kind of a control center where people were getting tips called in. And there were no shortage of tips coming in at this point. One of those tips led investigators to a local man named Mitch. He was a handyman for the family's apartment building. You see, the authorities discovered that Mitch had not shown up at work on the day that Maria disappeared. And in fact, he hadn't been at work since. The residents at the complex described that Mitch paid a little too much attention to the kids. Of course, authorities had to look into it. And when authorities looked into Mitch, he had no criminal record. But they had to check it out anyway. So they went to Mitch's house and they spoke to his wife. And the wife was really confused because she was like, no, listen. My husband has nothing to do with that little girl's disappearance. In fact, he was in the hospital at the time that she disappeared. He had surgery the day before and was in the hospital when she went missing, and he was recovering from his surgery. So now Mitch was also eliminated as a suspect. Now pause. Aren't you glad all these people have rock-solid alibis? Because if not, would they be under a cloud of suspicion? Got me thinking back to that Norfolk 4 case that I recently covered. Authorities questioned all the local sex offenders. They questioned all the weirdos in the neighborhood, including the guy who kept asking his neighbor if he could babysit the neighbor's daughter. Ew, hell no. They questioned a different guy who is a loner and has his walls wallpapered with a collage of women's pictures cut out of magazines. He's ultimately eliminated. It seemed that they might never find Maria or her abductor. By Friday, authorities expanded the search into the surrounding areas. They had helicopters searching, they had bloodhounds, volunteers who were distributing flyers, and local law enforcement was now meeting with the FBI. Eventually, the FBI took over the case. By Saturday, Maria's abduction and disappearance had made national headlines when it was aired on America's Most Wanted. In preparation for the case going national, the FBI had set up a 24-hour hotline, and police encouraged anyone who thought that they might have any information about Maria or if anything sounded suspicious to just go ahead and give them a call. By Sunday, April 2nd, they were no closer to finding Maria. Chief Carden told the Hanford Sentinel that each day adds a degree of seriousness to the situation. He said, quote, "I think it's important we find these children, any lost children, as quickly as possible. That would be our greatest hope, that she would be located and that she'll be in good health," end quote. As the clock ticked on without Maria, investigators were now exploring the possibility that Maria's case was related to another little girl's disappearance that occurred roughly a year prior to Maria going missing. It was the case of 10-year-old Victoria Angelica Ramirez, who lived in Hanford, California. She disappeared from a Visalia flea market. She was found 3 days after her abduction in an irrigation canal. Angelica, who was around the same height and weight as Maria, had been strangled and sexually assaulted. But so far, there was no solid evidence that the two cases were related, and Angelica's case was now cold. Would Maria's case go cold as well? Sadly, but luckily, Maria's disappearance would have a big break when 2 weeks after her disappearance on Sunday, April 9th, Maria's remains were discovered, and she was discovered 60 miles from where she went missing. On Sunday, April 9th, 3 boys were rafting on the Pozo Creek in the community of Famoso. It was north of Bakersfield, about 60 miles from Lemoore. As the boys were rafting, they discovered the remains of a heavily decomposed child's body. The body was so badly decomposed, in fact, that authorities weren't sure it was Maria's remains, but it was a strong possibility. By Tuesday, April 11th, the coroner's division confirmed that the child's body found in Pozo Creek was in fact the body of Maria Joanna Pecino. She was identified based on physical and her clothing descriptions. An autopsy was completed the day after she was found, but the official cause of death was not yet determined due to the advanced state of decomposition. The coroner's office needed to perform further testing to determine the exact cause of death. When authorities knocked on Arcelia's door, she opened the door and said, "You found her, didn't you?" Authorities asked her how she knew, and she basically said she dreamt it. She hadn't been eating or sleeping. One Lemoore deputy who started working Maria's case on his very first day on the job stated about the case, quote, "It was real tough on the officers involved because she was our little girl. and it was tough on the community because she was their little girl. I think everyone held their kids a little tighter after that. I did mine, end quote. After Maria's body was discovered, the Lemoore community was even more devastated. Determination and hope were replaced by grief and loss. Flyers with pink ribbons hung on trees and business windows. They were now a painful reminder of this little girl who went missing while going to buy a can of tuna. And the irony in all of this was that after Maria's remains were found, Angelica Ramirez's mother went to visit Maria's mom. Remember, Angelica was the little girl who was murdered a year earlier. After Angelica was murdered, her family relocated to Lemoore for the safety of their children. And now they were experiencing everything again with Maria's disappearance. Maria's funeral was held at St. Peter's Catholic Church, where hundreds gathered to mourn her loss. Pink was Maria's favorite color, so pink flowers and ribbons decorated the room. Several people in the crowd wore pink ribbons on their chest, and Maria's mother wore a pink blouse. Maria was laid to rest in the Stanford Cemetery in Hanford, California. Now that authorities knew exactly what had happened to Maria, they had to find out who did this to her. Crime Stoppers filmed a reenactment of the crime, which a Fresno TV station aired nightly during the 6 p.m. news broadcast. Maria's kidnapping was added to the Valley's Crime Stoppers program, and a reward of up to $1,000 was offered for information leading to an arrest and arraignment in the case. The result of Maria's autopsy was finally revealed that she had suffered from blunt force injuries and her cause of death was suffocation. The manner of death was homicide, and the advanced state of decomposition as well as the length of time Maria was in the water meant that it was not possible to determine whether she had been sexually assaulted. It should also be noted that when searching for missing children, they say that the first 3 hours are the most critical. If a child is not found within 3 hours of going missing, it is likely from the research that I found that they might turn up deceased. The discovery of Maria's remains dominated the news throughout this time, but it was fortunate because the heavy media coverage would lead to the break that everyone was hoping for. One viewer in particular was disturbed by the details of Maria's death, and she knew that she had information that could help the investigation. The woman reached out to the 24-hour hotline, and thankfully she reached an FBI agent that happened to be manning the phone line. Maybe it was divine intervention, or maybe it was something else. The woman told the agent that she believed the man who killed Maria was her brother. And the agent was like, okay, so why do you think it's your brother? The woman responded that her brother had sexually abused her from her earliest memory until she was about 15 years old. Not only that, she knew the location where Maria's remains were discovered, Pozo Creek. And Pozo Creek was a regular hangout for her brother and his friends when they were in high school. When authorities said, okay, what's your brother's name? She said, my brother's name is Gene McCurdy. So authorities wasted no time tracking Gene McCurdy down, but they quickly ran into a problem. This guy was no longer in the state of California. He wasn't even in the country. He was 5,000 miles away on the USS Abraham Lincoln, a nuclear-powered aircraft carrier on its way to the Persian Gulf. Yep, you guessed it. Gene McCurdy was a member of the U.S. Navy.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile with a message for everyone paying big wireless way too much. Please, for the love of everything good in this world, stop. With Mint, you can get premium wireless for just $15 a month. Of course, if you enjoy overpaying, no judgments, but that's weird. Okay, one judgment. Anyway, give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only. Then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
Saturday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Saturday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Saturday. Saturday, bring it on.
Gene McCurdy was the oldest of 4 children. He was born in 1960 and his family seemed to struggle financially. His parents remembered that he was a helpful child, didn't cause any problems, and never had any problems with law enforcement. He was also a Boy Scout. McCurdy graduated from Wasco High School in 1979, even though it should be noted that the family moved to California from Oklahoma in 1977. After graduating from high school, McCurdy entered the Navy and was stationed at the Lemoore Naval Air Station. McCurdy served at Whidbey Island Naval Air Station in northwestern Washington during the late 1980s. And he was returned to the Lemoore Naval Air Station for a second tour of duty in September of 1994. At the time, he resided at a Hanford apartment complex. Wait a second, didn't the other little girl live in Hanford? McCurdy was a first-class petty officer in Hanford and worked as an aviation mechanic. He was stationed at Lemoore at the time of Maria's death, and it turns out that the day after her body was found, he was deployed to the Western Pacific Ocean as part of Strike Fighter Squadron 22, and he was there on a routine 6-month mission. Authorities learned that he was currently on board the USS Abraham Lincoln off the coast of Japan. After checking into his movements the day Maria disappeared, authorities discovered some intriguing information that actually did put him squarely in the vicinity of where Maria was last seen. At 3:28 p.m. on March 27, 1995, McCurdy was renting adult videos in the same shopping plaza where Maria checked out at 3:20 p.m. A second receipt from 3:34 p.m. showed that McCurdy rented 3 more adult videos from a different Lemoore video store, and yet another receipt showed that at around 4:10 p.m., he rented an additional 3 adult videos at a different Lemoore video store. As they looked into McCurdy, they discovered that before his deployment, Gene moved out of his apartment and moved all of his belongings into a storage unit. It's unclear to me how authorities got permission, but they searched Gene's storage unit, presumably with a search warrant, and in the storage unit, they uncovered hundreds of pornographic films and sexually oriented magazines. Now, having that type of stuff in your storage unit or in your house or on your phone is not illegal. But what they discovered among those pornographic videos is that Gene McCurdy was a porn creator of sorts. He made explicit videos by splicing hardcore pornography, and then in between scenes, he added children's cartoons. Among the storage unit items were children's toys, which was also odd considering that Gene didn't have any kids. Investigators were able to present all this information about Gene to a behavioral scientist by the name of Mike Prodan with the Department of Justice, and when he reviewed the materials, he presented his opinion that Gene McCurdy had an abnormal sexual interest in young children. Now, when I was watching an episode of Unusual Suspects about this case, there was also a behavioral scientist on there who indicated that there are people who splice these types of pornographic videos with children's cartoons because they actually make children watch the cartoons. And then it will cut to a pornographic video, and then it will go back to cartoons. And this type of behavior kind of normalizes this for small children, usually children who are victims of sexual abuse. And honestly, that's the first time I've ever heard of this, and I found that information extremely sickening. As authorities tried to actually tie McCurdy to the crime scene, they remembered the shower curtain they found dug near Maria's body. Presuming it was used to transport Maria, authorities learned from a friend of McCurdy that the same or similar in color shower curtain was gifted to McCurdy as a housewarming gift. With all this new information, investigators wanted to speak to Gene McCurdy as soon as possible. The sheriff's department contacted NCIS, and they worked with an agent by the name of Carol C. I would try to say her last name, but I would just butcher it, so let's call her Agent Carol. Sorry, Carol. Agent Carol was on the USS Abraham Lincoln, and the FBI requested that she conduct an initial interview with McCurdy. They just wanted to see what he had to say. So, on April 18, 1995, Agent Carol interviewed Gene McCurdy, telling him that she was assisting in an investigation back home. She asked him whether he knew what he was there for, and he simply replied, quote, "It's the little girl in Lemoore," end quote. The agent said, "Yeah. Do you know anything about the girl, Maria?" He denied knowing anything about her case. Agent Carroll said that authorities were looking to talk to anyone who was in the same plaza around the same time as Maria when she went missing, and that his name happened to come up. She questioned Gene being in the area, and he said he was there renting some porn videos. When she asked him what he did after he rented the movies, McCurdy had amnesia and couldn't remember. He asked if the little girl had been found dead, and when Agent Carroll said yes, McCurdy became very upset. He put his face in his hands and began crying. He then asked the agent if the little girl had been sexually abused. The agent said she wasn't sure. When Agent Carroll asked McCurdy why he was so upset, he explained he was upset because he had recently quit smoking and had been under a lot of stress. After that initial interview, it didn't seem that Gene gave much information, besides his physical giveaway that he knew more than he was letting on. But the following day, Agent Carroll met with Gene again, and Gene confided in her that he was feeling very disturbed and paranoid because, quote, everyone was pointing fingers at him and that he was sick to his stomach, end quote. Agent Carroll described that Gene was visibly clenched fist, red eyes, shaky body movement, and he sat there and he said aloud, I don't know if I should get a lawyer. Why would you need a lawyer? Agent Carroll asked. Gene didn't say anything, but instead he cried and cried while rocking in his chair. After Agent Carroll told the FBI agents about her interview with Gene, detectives felt like it was time to arrest him. So with that, the investigative team from California flew to Yokota, Japan, boarded the aircraft carrier, and placed McCurdy under arrest for Maria's murder. Gene was flown into the Lemoore Naval Air Station on a military plane on May 4th of 1995. Now back on American soil, the 35-year-old sailor was booked into the Kings County Jail for the murder of Maria Joanna Pecino. The murder charge carried 4 special circumstances, elevating the murder charge to a death penalty case. The 4 special circumstances were kidnapping, rape, sodomy, and lewd and lascivious acts. McCurdy was also charged with kidnapping, possessing matter which depicted a minor under 14 in a sex act, duplicating a video or film in which a juvenile is engaging in sexual conduct, and persuading a minor to pose in a photograph. Investigators took blood samples, hair samples, and saliva samples from Gene McCurdy to be compared with evidence collected from Maria's body at the time she was discovered. When Maria's mother learned that a Navy sailor was arrested for her sweet daughter's murder, she was rightfully angry, but she felt relieved that at least a suspect in her daughter's murder was found. But she was confused. Weren't military members supposed to protect us, not harm us? Regardless of who did it, Arcelia said that this is still not going to return her daughter to her. He made her suffer, and now he should suffer. That's how Arcelia felt. When Gene McCurdy was arrested, everyone aboard the USS Abraham was shocked. Everyone was shocked. I mean, except for his sister, of course. Nothing about Gene McCurdy on the outside, the life that he lived, suggested that he could be guilty of such a heinous crime. He had no criminal history, a very good record in the Navy. They said that he was basically what they call in the Air Force Firewall 5. So he had top marks on all his performance reports. And he seemed to be a normal guy. I mean, I've seen a picture of this guy and he doesn't really look all that normal, but everyone around him thought that he was normal. Of course, you know, when someone is arrested for a big crime, reporters head to the person's hometown to ask questions about the person to kind of get the lowdown. This case was no different. Except when reporters went back to Wasco, no one really remembered Gene. He just seemed to blend in. Many of his high school graduating classmates didn't even remember him from Jack. One classmate, even after looking at Gene's picture in the yearbook, the guy was like, no, I don't remember him at all. Gene McCurdy's trial began in January of 1997 in Kings County, California, and he was facing the death penalty. Attorney David Lee was appointed to represent McCurdy, and Deputy DA Shane Burns and Assistant DA Larry Crouch were prosecuting the case. The prosecutor's case was based largely on witness testimony and circumstantial evidence, suggesting that the physical evidence didn't yield any strong conclusions, which kind of puts me on edge after covering the Norfolk 4 case. One of the prosecutor's main witnesses was a guy who I will call MJ. MJ testified that on the day of Maria's disappearance, he was in that shopping center. He told investigators that he saw Jean there in the parking lot talking to a little girl. MJ thought it was a suspicious interaction, and the reason he thought it was suspicious was because Jean didn't look related to the little girl. He was white and the little girl was Latina. MJ said he made eye contact with Jean McCurdy, who then turned his head quickly and walked away hand in hand with the little girl. MJ then walked to his car, 15 feet from Jean's truck. MJ saw someone short get into Jean's truck, and then Jean walked behind the truck and got into the driver's seat. As MJ drove off, he no longer saw the little girl walking. Something made MJ look at the clock in his car, which showed it was 4 p.m. However, he would later say on the stand his car clock was always 10 minutes ahead, so it must have been 3:50 p.m. when he saw that interaction. When the defense got up to cross-examine MJ had to admit that he was a convicted felon with a fraud conviction, but he denied having received any favorable actions for his testimony. MJ's testimony would later be discredited when the defense presented both of MJ's ex-wives, or his ex-wife and his soon-to-be ex-wife. They both said that MJ was a lying POS and he could not be believed. Ouch. In addition to MJ's testimony, the prosecution presented 3 receipts from the day that Maria went missing, and they were the receipts from Jean's porn rentals before and after the time Maria vanished. Now, break. I find the timestamps of the video rentals interesting because the theory must be that Jean kidnapped Maria and then visited the 3 video stores, or maybe he visited 1 or 2 before and then 1 after, because Maria was last seen checking out at 3:20 p.m. But someone also admits to seeing Maria in the ice cream aisle at the grocery store closer to 3:30 p.m. Jean then has those 3 receipts. They're time-stamped 3:28 p.m., 3:34 p.m., and 4:10 p.m. So it's an interesting timeline, and if MJ is to be believed, then you have to believe that Jean took Maria and then went to rent more porn videos. So did Maria stay in the car, or how did that work? In addition to seeing the receipts, the jury heard the titles of Jean's porn movie rentals. Another witness named Mary Smith testified for the prosecution. She was Jean's previous romantic partner, and she was also his neighbor. At the time of Maria's abduction, Mary's mother was visiting her. On the evening of March 25th, which was the same day that Maria went missing, Mary's mother heard what sounded like a child's soft whimpering through the common wall shared with McCurdy's apartment, which was strange because Jean wasn't known to have any children. Mary testified that the day after the little girl vanished, she and McCurdy were hanging out watching TV together in her apartment when all of a sudden a news bulletin came on about Maria's disappearance. Mary said that Jean sat up, became upset, faced the television, and shifted uncomfortably. A few days later, Mary told McCurdy that she was upset about the little girl's disappearance. McCurdy, who normally was an attentive listener, interrupted her, seemed angry, and wouldn't even make eye contact with her. One of Jean McCurdy's co-workers testified that sometime during the last week of March, McCurdy shaved off his mustache, and in the week preceding the deployment and while at sea, he appeared to be unusually agitated, frustrated, and a bit distant. The jury was told that on April 9th, Maria's fully clothed body was discovered in Pozo Creek, which was located in the greater Bakersfield area. McCurdy's parents' home was in Bakersfield, and McCurdy's sister testified that Jean was very familiar with the Pozo Creek because it was a well-known local landmark. Evidence was also presented with regards to the police search of McCarty's storage unit in Lemoore, where they found a box of approximately 30 adult-oriented magazines, several of which had content focusing on teenage girls that were staged to appear younger than their actual age. McCurdy later told Bruce Ackerman, a federal deputy marshal and an expert on child pornography, that he had purchased the magazines. He also acknowledged the women in the videos did look younger than 18 years old. At trial, Deputy Ackerman testified that in his experience, in every case in which a person had possessed similar magazines, that person had expressed a sexual interest in minors. Deputy Ackerman also testified at trial that when asked about the day of Maria's disappearance, Jean McCurdy said he could not remember what he had done after renting the videos. McCurdy's sister's testimony was probably one of the most heartbreaking things for jurors to hear. Donna said that Jean had sexually abused her when they were children, and that the abuse started when she was like 3 years old, and it continued intermittently for over a decade. She indicated that her and her brother, because, they didn't have a lot of money, they shared a room and a bunk bed together. But since Jean was only 5 years old, their mother allowed him to sleep on the bottom bunk with the daughter, and that's when he began to sexually abuse Donna, and he did so until they were teenagers. Several years after the abuse ended, Jean McCurdy actually apologized to his sister for abusing her and told her that one of the reasons why he never got married was, quote, because he was really afraid that he might molest his own children, end quote. Donna said that she kept the sexual abuse a secret because her brother threatened to kill her. And also, their parents thought that Jean McCurdy was pretty much a saint. And we'll see that that is very true a little bit later. But Jean did more than just abuse his sister. While living in Oklahoma and still very young, he got his hands on porn pictures. He taped them to the wall in the bedroom closet, and he would force his sister into the closet to look at them. When asked whether she ever told her parents, Donna said, quote, "My brother had told me we weren't supposed to tell our parents. He told me we would get in trouble," end quote. Eventually, Donna did go on to tell her parents, but she said they ignored her. She said that sometimes she would tell her mom, like, he's trying to look at me while I'm in the shower, but that the mom either didn't hear her, or if she did, she didn't do anything about it. But poor Donna knew her parents just didn't care, because Donna had told her parents that her grandfather tried to molest her in 1991, and her parents did nothing. Donna confronted Jean about the years of abuse because she was afraid for her own small children. And listen, y'all, it's not uncommon for people who have been sexually abused as children to kind of block that bad experience out of their minds until they have their own children, and then it comes flooding back. After Donna confronted Jean, he said that he had been thinking about it a lot himself. He then apologized to his sister, and he didn't deny any of it. Donna said even though she's come forward with this information, she has since forgiven her brother. Defense attorneys David Lee and Patrick Hart chose not to question Donna, and her testimony had a visible effect on jurors. Arcelia Farrell, Maria's mother, testified that her beautiful 8-year-old daughter was a helpful and thoughtful child who wanted to be a doctor when she grew up. Maria's abduction and death made Arcelia very afraid, and she also feared for the safety of her 2 remaining children. Maria's death caused her to have nightmares, and the family was still in counseling due to it. Arcelia also said that she was afraid to let her children go anywhere. During the Unusual Suspects episode, Maria's younger sister told the producers that she basically missed out on having an older sister her entire life. And she also felt that she missed out on having a mom, because after Maria was gone, her mother basically ceased to be there for her. The forensic pathologist that conducted the autopsy testified that he determined Maria did not die from a heart attack or other natural causes. I mean, listen, she was 8 years old, for goodness sake. He also concluded that she had died from suffocation. Maria also had non-life-threatening blunt force injuries. Based on the creek's temperature where she was found and the state of decomposition, the pathologist estimated that Maria's body could have been in the water for as long as almost 2 weeks. The defense presented witnesses who discredited any eye and ear witnesses, but the most shocking witness of all for the defense was Jean McCurdy himself. I do want to mention that during motion practice in this case, McCurdy's attorneys were partially successful when they filed a motion to suppress statements made by Jean McCurdy right after his arrest. I just wanted to throw that in there since it did appear that at some point during the interrogation, McCurdy did request an attorney on multiple occasions and didn't get one immediately. During his testimony, Jean denied any involvement with Maria's disappearance and death. He said that on the day Maria was abducted, he returned 12 adult-oriented videos and rented 9 more. Then he went to his apartment and watched all of the new videos, which he accomplished by watching some of the videos in fast-forward mode. It's interesting now that Jean remembered what he did, but initially when interviewed, he didn't. Anyway, Jean said that he was romantically involved with his neighbor, Mary Smith, but he denied being in her apartment after Maria's disappearance. He also denied having the conversation about Maria in which Mary claimed he interrupted her. When asked about his mustache and changing his physical appearance after Maria went missing, well, Gene claimed he shaved off his mustache around a week before his deployment because he wasn't going to be taking his electric razor with him. He admitted to being edgy during his deployment, but claimed his mood was caused by the stress of a new job that had a lot of responsibility. Gene admitted he lied to Deputy Ackerman about not knowing his whereabouts on the day of Maria's disappearance, but he was like, listen, I was embarrassed because I was addicted to pornography. Gene admitted to having visited Bozo Creek twice in the past, and that was where Maria's body was found. But he said he didn't put her there. With regards to the shower curtain, Gene said the shower curtain wasn't his and it didn't even look like the one he owns. When asked about the allegation his sister made, Gene McCurdy admitted to engaging in sexual activities with his sister while they were growing up. But he claimed the encounters were, quote, consensual. What a POS. He said that he and his sister had admitted to each other that they were both sexually abused by their uncle. In the end, Gene denied having a sexual interest in children. Now, I don't know about you guys and gals, but having to sit through this type of trial probably made a lot of jurors very, very, very sick to their stomach. On Friday, January 31st, 1997, 5 men and 7 women found Jean Estelle McCurdy guilty of kidnapping and murdering 8-year-old Maria Joanna Pecino. Following the guilty verdict, McCurdy slumped forward. His head fell to the table on his folded hands. He didn't look up again until bailiffs practically carried his limp body from the courtroom. Minutes later, surrounded by family and friends, Arcelia said the decision came as an answer to her prayers. She said, quote, I know God is in my life with justice for my daughter. My prayers will be easier now, end quote. Jean McCurdy's mom, Annetta, had always maintained her son's innocence, and she was there in the courtroom and proclaimed it loudly on the day of his conviction. She glared at the jurors and said, how could you? To the prosecution, well, she glared at them and said, I hope you're all proud of yourselves. Everybody gets a lawyer, but not my son. She turned to the investigators saying, we pay for your salaries. No, you didn't look for the truth. None whatsoever. You're all Judases. God is seeing it all. At sentencing, the jury showed no mercy for Jean McCurdy. They recommended he receive the death penalty, and that's exactly what he got. Until this day, Jean McCurdy remains on death row in San Quentin, where he has been since its conviction in 1997. None of his appeals have been successful. Jean McCurdy will likely remain in prison for the rest of his life, either if he gets executed or whether he dies of natural causes. But more likely natural causes because, as I've mentioned before, in 2019, California Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order to impose a moratorium on the death penalty in California. Now, this moratorium prevents the state from putting prisoners to death and granted temporary reprieves to all 737 condemned inmates on California's death row, including Jean McCurdy. So before I let you go, I want to talk to you a little bit more about little Maria. Little Maria Joanna Pecino was born on June 8, 1986, to parents Arcelia Farrell and Jorge Pecino in Lemoore, California. Lemoore is a small farming community of about 16,000 people in Kings County, about 200 miles south of San Francisco. When Maria went missing, she had a younger sister, Lucerito, who was 6, and a baby brother who was 18 months old. People have remembered that Maria was wise beyond her years, and she was also very responsible. She set the table, cleaned her room, and she helped her mother with her 2 young siblings. She once told her mom that when she got older, she was going to buy her a car and a house with big rooms, and that when she got married, she would be wearing a white wedding gown. Maria loved school, and she was in the 3rd grade. She was quiet and shy, but she had a lot of friends. Maria's memorial on findagrave.com says, quote, Maria was survived by her parents and her 2 siblings. Additionally, an entire community came together to embrace Maria's family during the terrible time after the child's disappearance, and we wept together at Maria's death. She will never, ever be forgotten, end quote. Arcelia Farrell still lives in the same two-story apartment that 8-year-old Maria Joana Pecino walked away from in March of 1995. Of the living arrangement, Arcelia said, quote, "My friends tell me I should move, but I can't. I go out for a walk and everything reminds me of her, but it's not the same. Everything seems so sad now." Arcelia says all she has left are memories and Maria's items. Her clothes, her shoes, her pictures, she kept them all. Arcelia said she still has dreams of Maria, and on those nights when she dreams of her baby, she wakes up crying. After Maria's death, Arcelia donated more than $5,300 raised from community contributions to organizations that helped during the search for Maria. Arcelia gave the money back to the community because she realized the need was there. She was surprised at how people came out in droves to help her search for her daughter, so she wanted to give back. Teresa Martin, Maria's elementary school teacher, said that Maria was a very loving little girl. She remembered that the last time she saw Maria in school, she ran up to her and gave her a big hug. Ms. Martin said Maria would be greatly missed. So what did you think, True Crime Army? I read all of the appellate court opinions, and I found it interesting that a lot of the evidence was circumstantial, eyewitness, and there was nothing really tying McCurdy directly to Maria, except for the fact that he was in the same plaza that she was in at the time that she vanished. An interesting case overall, and one that I had never heard of. All right, True Crime Army, thank you so much for listening this week. I hope to catch you next week. And don't forget to hit that like or that little subscribe check mark button wherever you're listening so that you never miss a free Monday episode. Shout out to Elizabeth for her help researching this episode. And shout out to one of my listeners who reached out in the last 3 weeks to recommend this case. As I mentioned, I never heard it, and I was equally shocked to read all of the facts. My sources for today's episode include various appellate court opinions, as well as a lot of archival newspaper articles found in the Hanford Sentinel, Lemoore Advocate, Fresno Bee, Lompoc Record, the Press Democrat, the Tribune, LA Times, Times Advocate, the Modesto Bee, the North County Times, Oakland Tribune, and BBC, as well as an episode on IDTV called Unusual Suspects. Military Murder is a Mama Margot production. The theme music was created by Ty-Ops. Until next time, remember, you never really know what someone is capable of, so remain vigilant always. You have a fabulous week, and I'll keep digging to bring you another military murder story next week.
Mama's working on her podcast. I don't want to.